Hello, friend. Welcome back. Today, we are not in my studio. We're in another studio, and I actually helped some friends build what you're seeing above me. So this is a giant overhead softbox, and today we're going to be walking through the build. I'm going to show you guys some footage. You guys are interested in building something like this for a space you have yourself. My hope is to help you with that, so I hope this video would be helpful. And you guys know that I love a nice disclaimer, so I'm going to put one at the beginning of this video and just say, I'm a filmmaker working as a DP and colorist. I do not often work in the grip department. I'm not a professional when it comes to rigging or building something like this for a studio. And my involvement on this project was simply to help assist this build. I didn't do all the planning. I didn't order the materials. I was simply there to help put this together. I had built one other overhead lighting rig before that was very DIY. So I knew a little bit, but I was just there as helping hands. And I thought it'd be fun to take you guys along for that process and show you guys the build. I hope that this video would serve as inspiration and hopefully showing you a general direction, but consult someone that knows a lot more than me before building something like this for your space. So here we are on day one. First order of business was just to figure out the general placement of where we wanted the softbox to hang. And the biggest thing I just wanted to point out is that this studio that we're working in actually used to be a fully fledged television studio back in the day. They already had a full lighting grid installed. And so this video is not going to, talk about how to install a grid. We knew that this was professionally installed and we would feel comfortable hanging something of this weight from it, but that is something you'll have to consider if you are more starting from scratch. You might want to consult someone about how to install a professional lighting grid. The frame of the entire softbox was built with 1-inch EMT conduit. We bought this from Home Depot, comes in 10-foot sections. And so for this first initial piece, we just started by arranging them on the floor in a square, making a 10-foot by 10-foot box. After we had the initial frame generally where we wanted it, we moved on to the diffusion. And so for this is just a piece of bleached muslin we got from Joann's. Fortunately, Joann's is, I think, in the process of closing down their stores and going out of business. So I'm not sure where is going to be the best place to get something similar. But for this, we bought it in the 119-inch width, and then we got 4 yards. So our piece was roughly 9.9 feet on one side by 12 feet on the other. We knew that we could probably stretch this to fit the 10-foot on the width, and then we would cut off the excess or just wrap around the extra fabric on the 12-foot length. Next, we got started on one of the most tedious parts of this whole build, and it was basically adding grommets to our piece of diffusion here. So we just had kind of a manual grommet kit that you use with a hammer, cutting the holes, and then you would add the grommets by hand with a punch. I think if I had to go back and do this again and I was building this with a friend or two, I would invest in the more handheld style grommet kits where you can just squeeze it with your hand and it cuts the fabric and installs the grommet at the same time. I probably would just buy 2. That way this process would go a lot faster. Once we had all the grommeting done, we went to kind of assemble this frame together. So to do this, we just used 4 of these 90-degree pipe connectors. We got these from a company called Maker Pipe, and they made kind of fitting these corners together really easy, just a few screws on each side. Now that we had our frame for our diffusion, we went on to basically make a smaller frame. This is going to be the base of the frame that was going to hold our tube lights up above the diffusion that then we were going to kind of encapsulate into the softbox. So these are the same 1-inch EMT conduit, just cut down to a smaller size. We wanted to offset the size where this would kind of form like a trapezoid of sorts. So this is us just laying out the spacing, trying to make sure we have it all the correct dimensions before we connect it all together. We then repeated the exact same process using the exact same 90-degree connectors to make this second frame into a complete square. We then added supports across the smaller frame with more 1-inch EMT conduit. We connected it using these T connectors, also from Maker Pipe, and we decided to kind of space these out evenly so that we could distribute the tube lights exactly where we wanted them, where there would be an even spread of light across the softbox. From there, we basically had our 2 frames built, and then we moved on to making this more 3-dimensional into that trapezoid shape. So again, more T connectors. We used some shorter EMT conduit that we cut on the sides. I think this was about 18 inches, 12 or 18 inches. I can't remember exactly, but we wanted this to offset so that there was space between the lights and the diffusion. so that it would spread evenly and be as diffused and soft as possible. We basically repeated this process on all sides. So there ended up being 2 of these diagonal vertical supports on each side of the box, giving us this final 3-dimensional shape. And I think at this point of the build, this is where it really started to come together. You can now kind of visualize it, how we're going to turn this into a softbox. There's a lower section that's going to have the diffusion, and then the upper section is going to be for our tube lights or any other lights that you would want to mount inside. Because our goal was to make this as budget friendly as possible, the lights that we ended up going with were the very old Quasar Science Q15T8 dimmable tube lights. These are 5600 Kelvin. I think they're about $20 each these days, and they are 2 feet long. So we kind of added up the amount that we would need. And so we ended up using 15 of these in total, 3 per horizontal bar stretching across this unit. And because these lights are pretty cheap, they're known to not be very durable, easily break. I've ordered some in the mail before that have come already damaged and they don't work. So first order of business before we even put these on the frame was to slowly test them all one by one, just plug them into an outlet and make sure that they turned on, because the worst case thing was we would get this thing in the air and then one of them wasn't working. We then took a little bit of extra time just to go ahead and tape these connectors on. We wanted everything to be really secure, and if one of these connectors, accidentally came unplugged because the cable got tugged on or for whatever reason, we just wanted to make sure that we would not need to get up there, get a ladder to fix such a simple thing. So we added some gaff tape to these plugs just to make sure they were all really secure. When it came to attaching these, we just decided to zip tie them, as that was kind of the cheapest and easiest solution. So you guys will see us right here setting up the first set of them. We tried to think about where we wanted the outlets to be. This part of the build was probably the newest thing to me, so I don't know a ton about electrical. But basically, these Quasars have really short power cables, and Caleb, who was helping me with this project, has a bit more electrical knowledge than me. He decided it'd be a good idea to basically take some cheap, 16 gauge extension cords that you use for a lamp in your house, and if we actually cut off the end and then open up power cables of the Quasar Science tubes, we could basically splice in the wires directly into these connectors, basically just giving us longer cables. This would then help with cable management up on the softbox, where we wouldn't need to add additional power strips. We wanted everything to run into one power strip that then could run through an extension cord up along the ceiling and then into the wall. So here's a little look at that process. You'll see just normal extension cord. We're going to go ahead and cut that end off. And then we use some wire strippers to then basically expose, I think, half an inch or 3/4 of an inch of the bare wire. And then we would tie this into the connector of the Quasar tubes. We did this for 5 of the tubes in total. It was the ones that were going to be on the farthest end of the set. So you guys will see the 5 kind of stretching across the top here, giving us a total of 15. But these 5 that are on the far end, we wanted those extra cables to be able to reach over to the power strips. After routing all of our cables into the power strip, this thing was really starting to come together. Thankfully, all of them worked. All of our cable splices that we made worked as well. And we were excited to start getting some diffusion on this thing and get it up in the air. And so here's where we ended. The end of day 1, we put in probably 4 or 5 hours, felt like we made some really good progress. The most tedious stuff being those grommets. That took quite a while with only one grommet kit. And then, splicing in these 5 cables to the Quasar tubes, getting them all zip tied after building the frame is just what consumed a lot of our time. But we felt like we made really good progress, and we were really excited to get in and finish this thing. And so here we are for day 2. This was actually several months later because we just could not find the time to come back in here and finish this up. But we're going to finish up the rest of this build here today. First order of business was just cable management. So we didn't touch any of that the last time. We wanted to just organize these cables, get them zip tied up to the frame so everything was really clean, where we could add then our diffusion fabric and reflective surfaces around the edges without hitting the cables. You'll also see Caleb on the ladder here. This entire system is going to be connected to pulleys that are mounted to the grid. So he was starting to figure out the exact spacing, where he wanted this. So we were ready to hang this once everything was pretty tidy. Now that we got all the cables tidy, this is the part of the video where you probably shouldn't listen to me. I don't know exactly how to explain what we did here. we were tying a very specific knot. Again, I'm not a rigging expert. You should probably consult the internet or someone you know how to tie the best knot. But for this, we use this twisted polypropylene rope, 3/8 inch. We bought 600 feet of it, which was more than enough what we needed. But this was well above the safe load that we needed to get this thing in the air. So the idea here was to tie this rope to each one of the corners that would then get routed up into the grid, into the pulleys, and then we would run the rope over to the wall where this could get tied off. And then if you loosened it, you could bring the entire softbox up or down pretty easily. As far as the pulleys, we were using these micro pulleys, and we attached those to the grid using these like chain link fence braces. I'm not sure if I have the link to the exact ones, but this made it pretty easy to mount this up here in the grid. We then ran the cable over, and we had the big spool just over here on a C-stand so that we could let out more length as we were going. Once we got all 4 ropes tied to the corners, we were going to move on to getting this thing up in the air. This thing was definitely heavier than we expected. It took kind of 3 of us to initially pull this thing up in the air. I think easily a 2-man job. I think if someone wanted to make this, if you wanted to go more high end, make this easier, you would attach this to some type of electric winch or something where you could push a button and it would raise and lower automatically. But we were just tying this off to basically this bar that we had the structural kind of operations person in this building install directly into the concrete of this wall, so it could definitely hold the strength of this, but this is what we were going to be tying off to. This is then where all our work with the grommeting really made this part go a lot faster. We basically took our diffusion fabric and we just zip tied this to all the sides. It took a second to kind of figure out the best layout for this, how to get it, exactly tight. We ended up draping it a little bit up on 2 of the sides instead of cutting off that excess fabric. And we just used as many zip ties as we needed to get this really snug and the tension even all the way around. A little bit of a last minute idea to improve this build. We ended up picking up some of this really thin reflective insulation. And the idea here was actually to wrap this around the sides. And it's this kind of reflective material on both sides. The idea here was to keep as much of the light, directionally kind of going downwards. Our hope here was to eliminate spill. And we could definitely tell that it added a lot because when we turned this off before and after using it, it really helped direct a lot more of that light straight down. And so we just, wrapped this around the sides with zip ties. There wasn't really an easy way to do this. So we simply poked holes and then connected a few zip ties together to make a longer zip tie and then made sure this was secure. It didn't need to be super sturdy and it got the job done for us because we were going to be covering it with fabric. It didn't need to be super pretty. And because our entire softbox is kind of a trapezoid shape, it wasn't the easiest to actually get it to lay flat and attach. And so the easiest way was, rather than trying to connect this in one big long piece, we decided to cut it into kind of 4 sections. And so we attached 1 section to each side. At this point, we were getting pretty close to wrapping this thing up. So the next thing was just the skirt to control the light spill. So this is black fabric that we bought again from Joann's. It was just kind of a normal solid cotton fabric. This was in the 44-inch width. And then we decided to buy about 14 yards of it to make sure we got all the way around. I think the only thing that we would maybe change down the road is once we got this up, there was a little bit of spill because this is not true duvetine, which is a much thicker black material. So if we were to kind of update this in the future, I would probably add a second layer of this fabric to double it up to make sure no light is spilling, but it wasn't actually that big of a deal, but just kind of one note after the fact that might be helpful. And we decided to just attach this with kind of small spring style clamps. The idea here was that, rather than using grommets and tying it in, you might want to pick up some of the skirt or let more of it down, and these clamps would make adjusting this in the future a lot more easy. Again, if we also wanted to add another piece of fabric, we could just take the clamps off and then put it right back up. And then once we had all our black fabric draped around this thing, you guys will see here, we did have our really long extension cord. So the power strip that everything was running into got plugged into this long extension cord. We then ran that up into the grid and then over kind of along the same line as the ropes for the pulley, and then this would just plug in directly to a normal outlet, firing all these up. These lights are pretty simple. They are just at a fixed intensity. They are able to be dimmed, and we didn't get to this portion of the project, but the plan here was to tie these into a wall-mounted dimmer. So we would cut the end off the extension cord, patch this into the electrical box, and then that would give you dimmable control of these lights. Again, we didn't end up getting to that in this video, but I wanted to include it as that was our plan. And so here at the end of day 2, we did the honors of hoisting this thing up. All 3 of us, pulling on this thing. Once we got it to what seemed like the desired height, we just tied it off, and this thing felt rock solid. Obviously made sure that it wasn't going anywhere, that it felt safe, but yeah, no issues with this build. We were really stoked on how it turned out. A few months later, we actually had the chance to come back in. I wanted to shoot some test footage of the light in this space. And so again, this is just using the overhead softbox as our key light. And then I brought in some Nanlite Pavo tubes that I just magnetically attached to the backside of the softbox, giving the cyc wall just a color wash. And so yeah, hopefully some of this footage is helpful to show you guys, what a setup like this looks like. The name of the game here for this space was just to have a light where, if you didn't want to bring any other lights in the studio, you just show up and you plug this thing in and you hit record, that you have really soft, even lighting, great for live music performances. That was going to be the main kind of use case for this space, but also talking head, whatever you would want to do. They might, feature an overhead soft source. We wanted to make that really easy in this space. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope that you found this video helpful. Please let me know any questions down below, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.